When life gives you magic, you might get some unexpected surprises. Follow Rochelle, a girl who keeps encountering comical situations in the magical world. Her story is full of laughter and surprises. 28. Advice I didn't plan to follow. I bolted upright in my bed when I awoke from the nightmare. Comforted by the semi-familiar walls of my dorm room, I relaxed back onto the mattress, happy to be awake. Only it hadn't been a nightmare. The memory of the Omega trial flooded back, and I sat straight up again. I was still in my clothes from the day before, laying on top of my borrowed sheets rather than between them. My shoes had been placed on the floor next to my bags. There was no indication that I hadn't made it there safely on my own. The thought that I hadn't been alone nagged at me, but without evidence to validate the feeling, I pushed it aside. Omega had tried to wipe itself from my memory and failed. What did Emily remember this morning? I grabbed my stuff and left my dorm, hopefully for the last time. I'd been saying that a lot lately. Emily's door was locked, and no one answered when I knocked. I took that as a good sign. She probably wasn't in there moping. That could be because she didn't remember what she had lost. I headed for the cafe in hopes that she had gotten up for breakfast like any normal day. When I found her, she and the group were leaving for class, having already cleared their table. Rochelle. Glad to see you could join us. Emily waved and smiled, and for a moment, my friend was back. But darkness clouded her face the longer she looked at me. Her smile slipped. She knew she shouldn't be happy to see me, but she wasn't sure why. Maria, closest to Emily, put a hand on her shoulder comfortingly. The rest of the group scowled at me. Scarlett, who had never warmed to me except to eat my leftovers, narrowed her eyes. Joseph shook his head in disappointment, while Orville looked at me with sad eyes behind his anger. Shaking her as if to head to clear it, Emily smiled hesitantly and said, "You ready for class?" Her world kept turning. She didn't even know that her axis had been pushed way off course. I didn't know how to get her back on the right path. "I'm right behind you," I said with a wobbly smile. Maria and the boys surrounded Emily as they passed me, shielding her from any further harm I could inflict. Scarlett hung back, stopping when she got to me. "You should be ashamed," she hissed. If only she knew how hard I'd tried to avoid hurting anyone. "Why don't you go find someone else's life to ruin?" "Scarlett, you have no idea." I didn't try to hide the plea in my voice. People would have gotten hurt if. People did get hurt, she yelled. Several students skirted around us to exit the cafeteria. Others stayed to watch even though classes were about to start. Scarlett didn't seem to care who heard her. "I know," I said miserably. "You know." Scarlett's confusion was enough to momentarily cut through her anger. "How do you know?" I shrugged to downplay the weirdness and said honestly, "I'm not sure. I just remember being in the clearing and then waking up in my dorm." Scarlett stuttered me, looking for an explanation. "You're not supposed to remember anything. Emily doesn't." She waited for me to tell her the secret, the scrutiny in her eyes making my skin crawl. When I didn't answer, she huffed. "Maybe it's better this way. Now you'll know why Emily can't stand you, even if she doesn't. A fitting punishment for ruining her life." I had already added that to the list of things that had gone horribly wrong since I came to Beatrice Potts Magischola. "I can fix it. All I needed was a chance. And a really good idea." "What can you do to fix it?" She spat. "There's a reason they didn't want you in the first place." "Let me try," I begged. Scarlett waited for a beat, as if she wanted to consider it. Instead, she pushed past me, growling, "Let it go." That was advice I didn't plan to follow. After Scarlett left the cafeteria without further altercation, most students lost interest in me. The room cleared quickly when there was no longer a promise of drama to make being late to class worth it. I wasn't going to class, but I couldn't just leave the Magischola yet. I imagined myself storming into the arena, drinking in all of the magic, and proving to Ms. Williams that Omega had been wrong about me. I wanted to make her reverse her decision, to force her to reinstate Emily. But I knew that would never work. What I really wanted was to go back in time. To tell my younger self not to look for my father. I wondered if I might have enough power to do it. If Jackson was right and I'd sent my father to a prison reality, who's to say I couldn't manipulate time as well? That might impress Omega. You should have left when I told you to. To his credit, Jackson didn't sound angry. Just disappointed. I added him to my running tally of all the people that I'd wronged in the last week. It was getting to be a long list. You know why I couldn't do that. A few of the remaining students noticed Jackson standing in Scarlett's place and decided maybe there would be drama after all. I could have given them what they wanted. Maybe it would have made me feel better to make a scene. Kicking and screaming wouldn't help Emily. Please get out of my way, I asked Jackson in a low voice, deciding not to make a scene after all. He stepped aside and swept his hand out wide in invitation. I ignored his feigned chivalry. People were watching, and I'd just decided against making a scene, stomping away in a huff and telling Jackson where he could stick his arm wasn't exactly sticking to that resolution. Without looking back, I left the stragglers in the cafe wondering what on earth the new girl had done to make an enemy of the seniors and attract the attention of the Lenore prodigy. Even though I refused to look over my shoulder, I knew Jackson had followed me into the hall. I didn't know where I was headed. None of my plans thus far had worked out anyway, might as well wing it. But after the third random turn failed to deter him, I rounded on Jackson, stopping him in his tracks in the middle of an empty hallway. Is there something I can do for you? I did not give him a chance to respond. My mission had been a spectacular failure. I couldn't seem to stop hurting people with every decision I made, and I didn't need to be scolded like a child. Or would you also like to yell at me? How about a threat or two? You're good at those. Jackson put his serious face on. I think we should talk. 29, at fault. Without a conveniently empty classroom nearby, we headed for the empty quad. When I asked why we didn't stop there, it was empty. After all, Jackson explained, if we are caught out here they'll make us go to class. At least in the dorms, we'll have privacy. I stopped in my tracks. I'm not going to your room. Turning to shoot a wicked grin my way, Jackson said, what are you afraid of? When I didn't keep walking, he rolled his eyes but kept going. Let's go to yours, then. I had to jog to keep up. Plus I closed the door behind Jackson and invited him to sit. Of the limited options, the uncomfortable desk chair or the naked mattress, he decided to stand. I stood too, not knowing if fleeing would be part of my future, but I dropped my bags on the floor. Running would be easier without them. After an awkward moment, I cut the silence with a question. You wanted to talk. Jackson folded his arms over his chest. I could already tell I was going to enjoy this conversation about as much as the last private talk we had. When I recognized you that first day, I was a kid again, watching my sister fade away. I wanted you gone more than anything. Jackson held my gaze, making me uncomfortable. So I talked to my father. And do you know what he said? I don't, but I bet you're going to tell me. He flashed a grin at me before seriousness overtook his features again. He told me to leave it alone. That's when I decided to keep an eye on you instead. And I'm glad I did. You're not the monster I remember. I grimaced, astonished but also oddly flattered. You sure know how to make a girl blush. When I want to make you blush, you'll know it. Another patented Jackson Lenore grin, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Damn him. I read that book you slipped in my bag, I said abruptly to change the subject. Jackson, with a knowing smirk, relaxed. He dropped his arms and propped himself on the desk under the windows across the room from me. And, since Jackson had been the one to initiate the conversation, I assumed it would be easier to talk to him. Maybe I had derailed his plan when I stopped the flirting, if that's what it was. The idea has merit. But even if it were possible, it isn't plausible. I would never send my father away. Just like I'd never hurt your sister. He clicked his tongue, his smile gone. That's where you're wrong though. I think both were accidents. You just didn't know enough about your magic. Clearly, you've learned a few things since then. I wanted to smack him. And kick him. And throw him out a window for good measure. Taking solace in the fact that he wasn't being cruel, I didn't attack him. He believed what he was saying. That didn't make him less wrong. We were friends, once. Do you really think I would do those things? Of the three of us, you were the one most likely to inflict pain on someone else. I remembered Jackson using magic to trip me and Cammy coming to my rescue. The air in the room changed, and it had nothing to do with magic. That's not fair. I used magic to win a game of tag. I didn't steal the life from anyone. Neither did I. I watched it happen. Old pain made Jackson's voice crack. He didn't bother with volume control. I got the feeling that he had been wanting to have this conversation all week. We were in a field behind the house and Cammy was teasing you with her magic and you lashed out with yours. You stole away all the magic out of her body because she annoyed you, and she never recovered. The implication rested uncomfortably between us. That wasn't how I remembered the last time I'd seen Cammy. Yes, she spent most of that afternoon poking me with her magic. Yes, my mercurial 8-year-old self was annoyed with her. I had told her to stop. And she did. Did I make her stop with my magic? Jackson's voice softened again. It still held the ghost of his pain, but he no longer wanted to use it to hurt me. You told us you were human. We thought you were safe. You probably thought you were safe, too. I said nothing, too busy trying to remember the rest of that day. I remembered going home and feeling sad, everything else was a blur. Continuing when I didn't respond, Jackson said, I've seen how much power you can handle when you're not even trying. If magic is attached to your emotions, you might have been susceptible to magic great enough to create another reality. And send your father there. He didn't have to finish the sentence. I thought I had it under control. My words came out hushed in disbelief. How could I have done these things without knowing? What other atrocities was I responsible for? You do, now. Children have normal tantrums every day, it's not your fault that you just have extra scary tantrums. Neither of us laughed, though I appreciated what Jackson attempted with his humor. How could he so easily forgive me? How was I going to forgive myself? A sense of deep self-loathing bloomed in my stomach. It grew and raged through me, consuming me, leaving me raw and helpless to the truth. If there weren't wards in the walls, who knew what I would do? There was a reason that Knowles didn't make it. I couldn't go back to my mom, not knowing what I was capable of. I should never have been allowed near other people to begin with. Like Marty, I was safest in a place like BPM, where the wards made sure I couldn't access my magic. Except that Marty said he could still see my aura even with the wards, which meant that the wards might not be as infallible as they wanted you to believe. I briefly thought about turning myself into the authorities, or the nearest lab. Certainly, I deserved whatever they would do to a null like me. But I didn't want the wrong people to know what I know. Lots of mags had enemies they might want to make disappear without a trace. Miserably, I added my own name to the list of the lives I ruined. You could stay, if you wanted, Jackson offered, reading my mind. I would keep an eye on you. Now that I know you're not a monster and all. I hated him for his kindness. I hated him for making jokes about what an aberration I was. And I hated him for not turning me in that day when he saw what my magic could do. Mostly I hated myself for knowing that none of this was his fault. I let him see all of that hatred in my eyes. Like you could keep any of them safe from me. Don't push me away, Rochelle, he warned, taking a step closer to me. I can help you, you just have to let me. I don't need help. I'm doing a great job destroying everything all by myself, thank you very much. Blood pumped in my ears. Regulating myself through all of the emotions wouldn't be easy, but I needed Jackson to leave so I could at least try. He stepped closer still, braving the storm that threatened to burst from me. You don't need any help destroying things, he agreed. But I am strong enough for the both of us. Jackson was close enough to touch me, he probably thought he was getting through to me. But I didn't need a caretaker, or a babysitter. When did you get so conceited? I spat at him, stepping backward to put space between us. If he so much as took my hand, I didn't know that I would be able to resist. His face dropped. We weren't playing games anymore. Probably when I became an only child. My fault. All of it was my fault. If he wasn't going to leave, I didn't have a problem doing it. I turned and fled the room. 30 Sad Wishes. When I was little, my mom and I used to cuddle up to read together before bed. She would let me pick the movie every time, even if we had watched my choice of film a dozen times that week. Dad used to say we brought out the best in each other. After Kama died, my parents moved us away from upstate New York faster than expected. That made sense now, but when it happened, I didn't understand the urgency to get out of town. We went to Vermont next. Then Maryland. We were back in New York when Dad disappeared when I made him disappear. The day after it happened, Mom stopped reading her books. She still let me pick our movies, but that was because she wasn't watching. She spent hours, days, studying the grass where he last stood. And when we moved that time, we took very little with us. I used to think she left her voice behind along with all our stuff for all that she talked to me in the months that followed. It took her another year to agree to teach me how to keep my magic sealed. Once I mastered the seal to keep my magic from exploding out of me, she seemed to relax. I should have known what that meant. Part of me suspected, but I didn't want to admit that my mother had been afraid of me, not even to myself. Jackson hadn't been afraid. He knew better than me what I could do, and he wasn't afraid. I wasn't sure where I was headed until I stopped in front of the library doors. Thankful to my subconscious for taking me to my happy place when I needed it the most, I entered on the lookout for anyone who might make me go to a class. The room was empty as far as I could see. No librarian, no students. I would have been surprised to see anybody at all since it seemed I might be the only student who regularly visited this space. Still, I found a table on the second floor, along the back wall behind the aisle of Ruin linguistics books. The library at Beatrice Potts Magischola had an extensive collection of books on the runes of every culture, and how to use them. That might be worth studying. Though the library was empty, the table hadn't been cleared from the last person who'd sat at the far end. I chose the chair across from their discarded notes and the open, forgotten herbology book. I just wanted a minute to think. Breathing in the smell of old books, I closed my eyes to try and quiet my brain. But agitation won. I spent the rest of the morning looking for books that might have more information on alternate realities and parallel universes. The only one I found was the same one the work-study student had suggested for me. It occurred to me that, as a scholarship student, I perhaps should have also had a work-study assignment. I imagined myself working in the library, or the front office and grimaced. That would have seriously cut into my research time. I'd never planned to be there long enough to follow through anyway. A small group of students came into the library during lunch. They spoke in hushed, serious tones, but did not come up to the second level where I hid. I breathed a relieved sigh when they left and returned to my table in the back. With my head resting on my arms on the table, I dozed. In my dreams, Kama chased me in the forest. She never got closer, and though my legs pumped as I ran, I never went anywhere. Plus, the sound of muffled giggles woke me. I groggily rolled my head to one side, assessing my surroundings, and realized I hadn't left the library. Where would I go? Sitting up, I stretched my arms over my head and the chair shifted, squeaking a little. The giggles stopped. I caught flashes of two figures dashing out of an aisle a few rows down from me, their frantic footfalls thumping in their rush to not be seen. Good for them. I was happy to know that the library stacks were used to gossiping and making out. The movies got that right. Nobody had come to claim the book, or the notes in front of me. Feeling nosy and avoiding my own problems, I picked up the handwritten notes. It was a list of plants with bullet points underneath each of the many uses the book called out. At the bottom of the page, the student had scribbled a frustrated note to themselves. I wish I could get this right. Me too. I took a pen out of the middle of the book, where it had been holding the page, and made my own wish. I wish I could start over. Looking at our sad wishes, I felt the urge to cry a little. Instead, I crumpled the paper in my hands. It was time to stop hiding. On my way out, I waved to the work-study girl, who had arrived for her shift sometime while I'd been napping my cares away. Did that book help? She asked as I approached her desk. It did, actually. Thank you for finding it. I smiled at her, finally happy to have one thing work out. Hey, what's your name anyway? Matilda, she replied after a moment. She looked uncomfortable, like she wasn't used to people taking an interest. I gave her a small smile. Thanks again, Matilda. Matilda went back to her assignment, but I could feel her eyes drift toward me as I passed the desk. I stopped before the trash can by the door to toss the crumpled notes and wishes. Nobody was coming back for them, and I wouldn't need it where I was going. The paper ball bounced off of the wall behind the trash with a light whack, and sailed into the can soundlessly. It was only as I was walking away that I realized the crack in the brick wall hadn't been there before. Only 2 chapters left. Thank you for sticking with me this long. This story was an experiment for me, and probably the most fun I've had writing in a long time. If you're enjoying Dangerous Magic, would you leave a comment and let me know? 31. I wish I could start over. I wasn't in the mood to talk it out, so I didn't head for the dorms. Jackson had better things to do than to wait in my plain, ordinary dorm room for me to return, but just in case, I avoided it. For completely different reasons, I avoided the arena. Better not to expose myself unnecessarily, so I didn't accidentally send someone to a prison realm, or steal all their magic. Again. I was bitter and moping, but it felt apropos after all the truth bombs that had been going off lately. Sue me. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. You know the feeling of being watched. My skin prickled with the weight of unknown eyes on me. Keeping my stride normal, I continued down the hall. I turned the corner, and the feeling of being watched subsided momentarily. The instant that feeling came back, I knew I was also being followed. Another corner, and I broke into a run headed for the main entrance, only stopping when my pursuer called out a taunting question. Trying to steal another car. Miley. I slowed, stopping only once I was close enough to the doors that I could make a break for it when the opportunity presented itself. What are you doing here? Miley rolled her eyes at me. Making sure you don't do anything stupid, she said with a huff. Strutting without hurry, Miley walked with deliberate steps until she was only just out of reach. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of backing away. I'd just have to be faster than her. Who asked you to do that? Who do you think? Jackson. My heart thumped uncomfortably hard and my palms felt slick. I hadn't scared him away. Ms. Williams thinks there's something weird about you, Miley said, bursting my bubble. And I agree. What are you hiding? I wouldn't be very good at hiding it if I told everyone who asked, now would I? I smirked at her, going for the picture of relaxation. No, Miley, your presence doesn't make me feel insignificant. And you didn't just get my hopes up that Jackson cared enough about me to send in a spy. Not at all. Was it too much to ask to be left alone to wallow in peace? My aimless wandering surely didn't hurt anyone. But Miley didn't buy my feigned confidence. What were you doing last night? She asked her question like she already knew the answer. Which she did. It was a test to see what I remembered. Before or after I ruined that car so that I could escape the Omega trial. Miley's eyebrows shot up. She hadn't been expecting honesty. She did not get a chance to respond. A car horn blared from the parking lot as the alarm started. Curious to see who else at BPM was trying to escape, I opened the door and left Miley behind. Rather, I tried to leave her behind. Miley followed me out into the mess of the parking lot. Leaves and small tree branches scattered the ground and littered the tops of cars like Mother Nature's glitter. A strong wind had picked up, and it whipped my hair around my face, forcing me to squint. Miley had similar issues. The car alarm came from an SUV in the first row that the wind had so politely decorated with a large tree limb. What is happening? Miley asked. Or at least that's what I thought she said. The wind stole away her words as they left her mouth. I was pretty sure it wasn't supposed to storm. As soon as I thought it, that's when the lightning struck the ground in front of me, missing me by no more than a few feet. Scrambling backward, I grabbed Miley, who stared out at the parking lot with her mouth open, and pulled her back inside the building. We forced the door closed, stepping back to stare, stunned at the sudden onslaught. Wind struck the outside walls angrily. The Beatrice Potts Magischola building shook, windows in their panes protesting, walls groaning under the pressure of keeping the wind out. Who would attack us? Incredulous, Miley didn't take her eyes off of the door, but she jumped when the building shook a second time. Attack? It's just a storm. But the doors rattled as the forceful current tried to pry them open, and suddenly I wasn't so sure it was just anything. Not one to waste time explaining, Miley dashed off down the hall, probably in search of someone who could actually help. My magic wasn't going to do any good in an attack, even if I could access it. But I found that I could. I hadn't realized that the heavy blanket that blocked the touch of magic through the wards had been lifted. Weird. Alone again, I racked my brain for a way to help. My magic, when it obeyed, acted like either a mimic or a destructive force. With enough magic, I could impersonate any mage's skill. I could also blow stuff up, which was usually more impressive. Assuming this was an attack and not a natural storm, the caster was most likely an elemental. Luckily for BPM, I'd spent the last week impersonating an elemental, and I'd researched them before taking on the role. Most elementals, major and minor alike, manipulated small amounts of single elements at a time. For the weather to be so ferocious, we were either dealing with a very strong major, or multiple casters with one goal. Most likely the caster or casters would be outside the Magischola, just beyond where the storm originated. If I could find their hiding spot, I could disrupt their focus and stop the storm. I pushed on one of the double doors, and just that tentative crack provided enough room for the wind to snap it out of my hands, swinging the door wide. It bounced against the brick wall and stayed there. The other door soon followed. The wind whipped through the hallway, beckoning me outside, pulling on my clothes to entice me to step over the threshold and into the storm. The magic didn't feel exactly malicious. It felt familiar, like coming home. It felt like my magic. Both mimic and destruction together in one storm, hell-bent on destroying the Magischola. Then I remembered writing those words, throwing them out, the crack in the wall. I wish I could start over. Responsibility flooded through me. I knew what needed to be done. I walked out into the storm and did not look back. 32. What did you do? Well, I tried to walk out into the storm. As soon as there was no building to even moderately protect me, the wind scooped me up and pulled me further into the parking lot. I was lucky to keep my feet flat on the ground, but only just. Several cars swayed as the gusts berated them. It was only a matter of time before they were as easy to pick up as I was. Lightning struck again. Thunder rolled across the sky, not with hostility but with righteousness. The storm thought it was doing the right thing in persecuting the school and everyone in it. Okay, storm, you made your point. Wish granted. My own voice was hard to hear in the wind. Time to UN grant it, please. The wind continued to howl and then the rain started. A siren sounded in the distance. I didn't have a lot of hope that a heartfelt please would work, but you can't blame me for trying. The other option wouldn't be nearly as enjoyable. What did you do? And now you're all caught up. The wind made it difficult to whirl around to see Jackson with Miley not far behind, but safely within the threshold of the school coming to the rescue. How do you know I did anything? I demanded, yelling back at him. Jackson fixed me with that look, the disbelieving do I look like an idiot look. I wanted to smack it off of his face. Instead of hitting him, I asked the obvious question. What are you doing out here? He should be inside, safe, with Miley. His next look was the how could you be so stupid look Cammy used to give us when we were little. I guess she'd taught it to Jackson when I wasn't looking. He must have spent the last decade perfecting it. I'm here to help. What did you do? He repeated. Embarrassment was pointless, standing out in the storm like a fool, thinking I could talk it down with words. My life was sad so I wished for a better one, I yelled to him. It was the shortest version of the truth. The full story had a lot of I don't knows and several it was an accidents. I would clean up my mess no matter how it came to be. You should have come to me, he shouted. This was not the time or place for that conversation. Because we are so close. And you're such a good guy now. And you'd drop everything just because I asked. He came running when Miley went to him. I didn't want to wonder if he would have done the same had it been me asking. I suspected the answer would be a resounding no, but I wasn't about to ask. I ignored the undecipherable look in his eyes and pressed on. I think what I need to do is take all the magic back. Release it properly instead of letting it rage on. Jackson did not let whatever he was feeling hold him back from the task ahead. He buried those sentiments and put his serious face on. Granted, the seriousness of his look was denigrated slightly due to the squinting, but I got the gist. How can I help? I smiled at him. His was the hard part of the plan I was still developing. The wind picked up around us, tearing at me angrily. It was getting harder to stay on my feet. Making matters worse, the rain finally soaked through my clothes to chill my skin. My wish, unintentional or otherwise, had given the magic a purpose. The magic wanted to have a purpose. It wasn't happy that I planned to take that away. You need to keep me from getting overwhelmed and blowing up. But my words were lost in the tempest, the wind and rain gobbling them up before Jackson had a chance to understand what I needed from him. He said something in return and pointed to his ears. The greedy weather stole away his words. I wasn't going to be able to take advantage of Jackson's magic after all. It didn't do any good, but I glared up into the sky. That was a dirty trick, and the magic knew it. Or perhaps I controlled the storm, and it was me stopping any sound except for the wind and the rain. Behind me, one of the cars slid into its neighbor, the scraping loud enough to be heard despite the wind. I imagined a teacher's car plummeting into the nearest brick wall, and I knew it was time to end the storm, regardless of who was in control. I turned, leaving Jackson to either follow or flee at his discretion. I told myself I didn't need his help, even though I knew it was a lie. The storm's strength grew with each step I managed toward its nexus. I knew I wouldn't get a second shot, and I wanted this one to count. I fought the wind, letting it buffet me. The rain distorted my view, but it didn't keep me from my goal. Slowly, so slowly, I reached the tree line on the opposite side of the lot. Trees too thick to wrap my arms around swayed like delicate bamboo reeds in the wind. Leaves flailed in the wind, unsure where the storm wanted them to go. When I was as far from the building and all her inhabitants as I was going to get, I ripped the seal off of my magic. It made an imaginary popping sound that deafened me to everything else. Even my own heartbeat was silent. Now or never. I lifted my arms to create a metaphorical funnel for the magic to drain into me. A giant blinking arrow showing the power where to go, straight in through my skull. Nothing happened. The storm continued to rage. No magic voluntarily filtered into me the way it did in the arena, despite being surrounded by so much of it. I may not have been able to hear it, but the storm still pulled me in all directions at once. That should have worked. Usually, magic wanted to be part of me. I had to seal myself off from it to make sure I didn't carry enough to hurt anyone. And thanks to the amount of energy I'd used unconsciously to create the storm in the first place, there was plenty of room for more. But the magic didn't want to be trapped inside me. It wanted to play. I just wanted to stop it from hurting anyone on my behalf. When I wished to start over, I didn't mean literally start the building over from scratch. Dropping my arms to my sides, I opened my palms to the sky and pulled. The magic resisted, but not enough. First, the rain stopped. I drank it in, taking all the energy that the magic would have used to drown the school. That was enough magic to fill me up all the way. The wind slowed next. The trees settled back into comfortable stoicism, only their branches swaying in the breeze. Leaves and twigs and other debris scattered around the dirt walkway Miley had led me down the night before. The parking lot behind me didn't fare much better. As the force of the wind died down, the magic replenished every piece of me. It was simultaneously exhilarating and discomforting, bordering on painful. Like gorging yourself to the point that your stomach is a hard, heavy lump, and you regret eating so much no matter how good the food was. When the pain came, not even my own scream cut through the deafness. I knew I screamed, I just couldn't hear it. Every inch of my body was covered in magic I could barely contain, but the storm was not finished. I continued to pull the energy into me. There was nowhere else for it to go. There had been a reason I got so far away from the school. If I could reduce the damage inflicted by the magic, that counted as a win in my book. My body felt on fire, but I refused to stop. A thought came to me through the pain, unbidden, as if it weren't mine, but the magic's idea. What if I didn't give up the magic? What if I used it instead to liberate nulls all over the world? By now, I was more magic than flesh and bone. I would be a power like the world had never seen. Jackson's face floated across my memory. Images of my favorite people came to me. Emily's kindness, her friend's acceptance, my mother reading to me, my father laughing with me. Just like the magic, I wanted to have a purpose. Maybe my purpose was to save these people from myself. Kneeling was agonizingly slow, my stiff body fighting me every second. But I didn't stop once my knees hit the ground. I forced myself to bend forward, to place my hands in the dirt, and to let go of the magic. It unexpectedly didn't fight back. Energy rushed out of me, into the earth, with alarming speed. The world beneath my hands and knees shuddered, accepting the power I gave it. Power I had no idea I could wield in the first place. The part of me that wanted to keep the magic howled. I tried not to let it frighten me enough to stop. Keeping the magic would only make me more dangerous, but that's why I wanted it. Draining that much magic took a lot longer than it ever had before. Long moments passed where I did not move. I could not see anything except my hands on the ground, could not hear anything at all. I felt only the emptiness that the magic left behind. Spent, I relaxed my arms and sat back on my heels, my legs folded beneath me. I let my body slump, feeling boneless. A fog rolled in. It had no intentions, though it was magical, and for that, I was grateful. I didn't have the strength to dispel it. Someone crashed to the ground next to me. Jackson, his face a mask of worry as he came to a kneeling position that mirrored my own. He checked me for physical injuries. Luckily, my wounds would all be internal and invisible. I couldn't feel the magic anymore. Any of it. Magical energy had been as constant as the air I breathed, always present even if I couldn't see, hear, or feel it. Until now. I wished I'd kept some of it. Jackson said something I didn't hear. His lips moved frantically. I didn't have the energy to even tell him that the magic had backfired in a small way. It seemed trivial and unnecessary. I wondered if this was how Cammy had felt before she wasted away, unable to touch the magic. A tear rolled down my cheek at the thought. Jackson panicked when he saw it, or maybe he was happy to know that part of me was still alive in there. He looked at someone over my head, speaking to them instead of me. I wasn't sure if they answered. I took in the sight of his face, his windswept hair. This was not how I wanted to remember him. Miley stepped into my view. I kept my eyes forward, unable to acknowledge her even if I wanted to. If she was safe, so was the Magischola and the rest of the students. That would have to be enough. I closed my eyes and gave into the darkness. Only one chapter left. I hope you stuck with this one. I know it was long. Penultimate episodes usually are. Ready for the last one. 33. What comes next? The world beneath me was shaking again. I didn't do it this time, I swear. Startled out of my sleep, I braced myself, expecting to find the weather all out of sorts again. No, it hadn't been the earth trembling, just Miley shaking me awake. I'm awake, you can stop, I said. My ears rang, but I would take the piercing noise over the lack of sound any day. Miley shook my shoulders one last time, for good measure. Miley sat on her knees and hovered over me where I lay in the dirt. We were still in the trees, partially hidden by the rows of cars between us and the school. I ached all over. Muscles, fingernails, hair follicles, everything hurt. Just making sure. Miley looked like she wasn't sure she had wanted me to wake up. Without an innate connection to magic, I wasn't sure I wanted to be awake either. You have to get out of here, she insisted. Tell me something I don't know. Working on it. I groaned, pushing myself off of the ground. Every time I try to leave, you seem to be the one in my way. Miley muttered the understatement of the year, wrong place, wrong time. I wanted to smile at her, but it hurt too much. Where's Jackson? I could tell that Miley and I were alone. Distracting everyone so you can get away. She gestured toward the school. When I looked, I could see the flashing lights of emergency vehicles over the tops of the parked cars. They sent the fire department and the police looking for whatever caused that freak storm. Finally seated once again, I rolled to my knees. I had to close my eyes against the onslaught of vertigo that spun my brain around in my skull and threatened to knock me out again. The ringing in my ears dissipated from shrill to dull to make up for the headache. Where did it go, anyway? I shrugged, my eyes still squeezed shut. Where did the magic ever go when I released it? Into the earth. Miley shook her head, her many earrings clanged together, and I heard the rustle of her hair brushing against her jacket. That much power would have ripped a chasm in the ground. And maybe revived a few of these dead trees. And probably manifested some new ones. Do you have any idea how much magic you handled? The only answer I could give her was another shrug. My brain hurt too much to come up with a lie, and my teeth hurt too much to tell one. If Jackson hadn't told her what I wasn't going to. Miley would figure it out, or she wouldn't. We sat for another minute, with the only sounds coming from the muffled discussions of adults making plans, and the rumble of the fire truck. When I could pry my eyes open without wanting to fall over or throw up, Miley helped me stand. I decided to accept her help rather than push her away. She led me further into the trees along what used to be a well-worn path, until we reached the clearing from my Omega trial. The tilled earth was covered in debris. You wouldn't even know anything odd had happened there. Though I knew there had been leftover magic in the clearing from last night, I couldn't feel it. That could have been because I'd broken something inside me, because the magic that had been here had joined the magic I sent away. I wondered for half a breath if the BPM chapter of the Omega Society would be impressed that I'd saved their lives. We could leave out that part about my being the reason their lives were in danger in the first place. Maybe Jackson could use it as a bargaining chip to get Emily back in. Is Jackson meeting us? I had things I needed to say to him. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel dangerous because I couldn't touch the magic, and I wanted to tell him how sorry I was. For everything. What if my magic never came back? Did that make me human now, or was I still a null? Don't be stupid, Miley snorted. She did not stop in the clearing, opting to go straight through to the other side. He's busy cleaning up your mess. We need to keep going. I, on the other hand, stopped in the middle. Did she just say we? Surely I misheard her. Where are you going? I asked, playing dumb. We are getting away from the crime scene. There was that word again. She finally stopped to look back at me from her new position among the trees. Jackson said you would have a plan for getting out of here. So what's the plan? My plan went to shit when she stopped me from getting a car last night. There was no backup plan, no contingency vehicle stashed in the woods. And without magic, I had no hope of keeping us safe. Miley understood my silence. Sounds like we'll be winging it to start. Great. I didn't need a babysitter. You don't have to go with me, I told her. I'll be just fine on my own. Look, I don't like it any more than you do. You think I want to hang out with a freak who has a crush on my boyfriend. Not my idea of a good time. But Jackson gets what Jackson wants. There was no point in telling her how wrong she was about me. Freak, yes, I was born that way. But a crush on Jackson? Not likely. Miley turned and continued through the trees, calling back to me as an afterthought. Keep up. We had no plan. I didn't even know what kind of magic Miley had. But she was right, we had to get as far away from the Beatrice Potts Magischola as possible. I had already done enough damage. Thanks to my time at Beatrice Potts, I had more questions than answers. So much information had been kept from me, but I knew where I wanted to start looking next. With one last look at the school, I could no longer see through the trees, and knowing that walking away now would mean abandoning my mission, and the people I had put in danger in the first place, I followed Miley in the opposite direction. Everything in me told me to run. This was far from over. Rochelle's story is one of growth, love, and courage. If her emotional journey has moved you, please stay with us, subscribe to our channel, and let's continue to accompany her through every emotional ups and downs.